Hey, what's up? This is Mr. Ippolito, and today we are going over the reading that I have provided for you. It's titled Gold Rush Missions, Mormons, and Women. Now, it is going to help you with a couple of different things. It's going to help you with push-pull factors here on the front page of the Unit Exam Review Study Guide. It's also going to help you with the section titled Gold Rush Missions, Mormons, and Women. Now, you may ask the question, Mr. Ippolito, when did we ever get this information? We didn't learn this. You actually did. It was sprinkled throughout Chapter 9, Sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what I decided to do was I decided to kind of put it all together and maybe kind of add a little bit more to it to enhance the story. This is all information that was previously, you've already previously read about, but just kind of putting it all in one place and making it easier for you to find. So again, what we're about to go over is going to help you with push-pull factors here. It's also going to help you with this section here. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, California Gold Rush. Again, this is not an audiobook. I'm not going to read it for you word for word, but I am going to go over some of the sections just so you understand. So we're going to start off here. And by the way, I should show you where to find this. I put it in a couple of different agendas. Maybe the easiest place for you to find it will be right here in the study guide, where it's Gold Rush Missions, Mormons, and Women. It's right here, along with the study guide, along with the westward expansion map as well, as you're preparing for your exam. So that's probably the easiest place to find it, right here at the top of the Manifest Destiny unit. So we start off by explaining the Gold Rush origin story here, right? About where it began, 1848. James Marshall discovers it on John Sutter's land. Now let me just show you really quickly kind of where we are here. So this is, I'll zoom out at first. This is a map of California, right? So this is actually an 1851 map, and this is the San Francisco Bay. Here we are down here in Southern California here, but the gold rush is taking place up here in Northern California. So as we previously discussed, those people who were wanting to mine for gold, very rarely did they travel across the United States. That was very slow. It was very dangerous. There was no transcontinental railroad yet at this time in the 1840s and 1850s. So they're not traveling overland. A stagecoach or like a prairie schooner to travel in a covered wagon from the East Coast, especially from a place like New York or someplace over on the Atlantic coast, would have taken 6, 7, 8 months or more. It's actually faster at this time to get on a ship and go all the way either around the tip of South America or to kind of land either in Panama or Nicaragua in Central America, do an overland route, pick another ship up in the Pacific Ocean, and then go up to California. But you've learned about that previously. So they would land here in San Francisco Bay, and then from there, they would head out to Sacramento and the Sacramento Valley, and then that would become kind of the launching point for gold country, right? So El Dorado County, Placer County, Nevada County, like all of this area along the Feather River and the American River, the Cosumnes River, like all of these areas right here are going to become gold country in the gold rush. Okay, so again, this is one of those situations where they were hoping, you know what, let's just keep this a secret. Well, you can't keep something like gold a secret. And a little bit is discovered in a few different riverbeds. I believe it was the American River where gold was first discovered in Sutter's Mill, which is in Colusa, which I think if we zoom in here just a little bit, or I might zoom in a lot. Oh, that's very zoomed in. And now I'm in. Oh, now totally messing up my my window here. Just outside of Sacramento, there's Sutter's Fort, and then there's Sutter's Mill right there, Coloma in El Dorado County. So that's where it's first discovered, and then along all these different rivers is where they're looking for it at first, and then they're starting to mine. They're panning for it, they're mining for it, they're just looking for it wherever they can find the gold along the riverbeds in the what we call gold country in the mountains to the east and the north of Sacramento. So eventually, President Polk mentions it, like this is something that he's proud of, like gold has been found in California during my presidency, and, he's very proud of that because you'll recall this is right at the end of the Mexican-American War. So from 1846 to 1848 is the war. The war is won. California becomes part of the United States. Just President James K. Polk is super proud and excited about all this. So, but what ends up happening is it really ends up being more hype than actual gold, right? So They caught gold fever in the hopes of striking it rich, but it's actually more hype than actual gold. Therefore, the people who are actually making more money, we've talked about this previously, are not the gold miners themselves. It's actually the storekeepers, the cooks, the carpenters, teachers, farmers, like people who had a trade, people who could provide like supporting roles for all of these people who were coming out to California to work, to work in gold mines or to pan for gold in rivers and streams. It was the general stores, the cooks, the kind of setting up makeshift restaurants, other businesses, trading posts providing supplies, providing things like blue jeans, providing shovels and axes and other supplies and food for the miners. They're the ones who really ended up making the most money. So by the mid-1850s, gold is becoming very, very difficult to find and fewer people making their fortunes. Finally, the Nevada Silver Rush begins in 1859, just 10 years after the 49ers, right? They rush to the California gold fields. And so essentially the California gold rush can be characterized as meteoric. Now, that's a question that is on the study guide. I'm not going to answer it for you, but I hope you now have a better idea. If you remember the definition of meteoric when we were talking about Tecumseh's career being meteoric, why is the California gold rush? Why can that be considered or characterized as meteoric? I want you to think about that. Okay, next we're going to move into pioneer women. So, as the reading says, life was especially challenging for women because not only were they taking on like all of the family jobs, right? The supporting, the cooking, the cleaning, the childbearing and child rearing responsibilities, but they were also doing a lot of other things as well. First of all, pioneer women, they were not always necessarily women. They could be married as early as 14 or 15 years old. And starting when you're a teenager, you were having to do all of the duties, the traditional duties of a wife and mother, which meant, caring for a house, but also wielding an axe and building a garden and clearing trees and removing stumps. So they're kind of having to do double duty. They're doing some of the jobs that, kind of these manual labor jobs that would traditionally be reserved for men. But then because there are no labor, you can't necessarily hire a laborer when you're out in the middle of nowhere. So you provide, you and your family, the adults in your family, perhaps if you have teenage children, they might be able to help out. But for the most part, that's being done by the husband and the wife of a family. And so a woman was doing a lot of manual labor, going and finding water, then cooking and cleaning and washing, also dealing with rodents, marauding animals like bears and coyotes and mountain lions. So now you may be asking, where was the man? Where was the father in this traditional family setup, right? Where was that man either working in the fields or mining? But what that meant was in that traditional family, again, women were not only doing all of these physical jobs, but still, again, tending to keeping the family together and tending children and all of that. So, this last paragraph talks about it was more than a life of tease and visiting. So oftentimes, it's interesting because oftentimes these pioneer families that moved out to the West, they had money. They had, these weren't poor families that were in search of something because they had nothing. They had enough money usually to own a house somewhere in the East where they came from. But they are choosing to uproot themselves, either for adventure or for a fresh start, or for, we talk about those push-pull factors. And sometimes for some of these pioneer families, it's not because they're trying to escape poverty, because they had property, they had land, they had some farming skills. So generally they owned at least a small farm somewhere out in the East Coast. So why was it that they would leave this life of relative comfort if they were property owners, homeowners on the East Coast? So it's something interesting to consider, right? So definitely a different life than tease and visiting, which is what a woman of status, if you had even just a little bit of money, women would not have had to have done all of the manual labor. They would have still been responsible for cooking and cleaning and taking care of children, but they certainly wouldn't have been dealing with cougars and mountain lions, bears and all of those other things that they were dealing with out in the pioneer. So the bottom line is that out in the West, women worked hard and proved themselves as equals, which is why when we finally get started, women start getting the right to vote in the 1800s, starting in like the 1870s, 1880s. There, you got to realize that nationwide in the United States, women did not get the right to vote until the 19th Amendment in 1920, just a little over 100 years ago. But women were gaining the right to vote faster out in the West. And I think a lot of it was because of this pioneer spirit, these pioneer women who proved themselves that they were just as, emotionally and physically as strong as the men were. Okay, let's get into California missions now. So California missions, you probably already learned some of about when you were in fourth grade history. But I thought that this paragraph was interesting here because it talks about how the King of Spain is wanting to establish permanent settlements. This is in the late 1700s, just as England was over on the East Coast establishing permanent settlements, right? In Virginia, Massachusetts, the Carolinas, like the original 13 colonies. Spain was doing that same thing over on the West Coast of North America. And wanting to kind of stake their claim because the British and the Russians, this is a question here that it gets answered. It is which four countries had claims to the land. So which four countries had claims to this Oregon country land in the 1800s. And it's somewhere in the textbook. I honestly couldn't tell you where, but I'm going to tell you right here where it is. I'm not there yet. So the four countries, Spain, the United States eventually by 1800, and then the British and the Russians, or Great Britain and Russia. Those are the four by the 1800s. Those are the four countries that still have some sort of claim in North America, particularly in the land of the Oregon country right here. Okay, so the settled land, became part of New Spain. These missions are interesting because they become places of encounter. You may have heard this term in 7th grade history. Places of encounter. They're centers for commerce and cultural exchange where a lot of different people, not just members of the Catholic Church, but where a lot of different people kind of converge for trade, for agriculture. They're kind of meeting. It's a place of convergence. And I wanted to quickly show you. So I showed you the map of Gold Country. I'll show you a map now. This is of Southern California. And, in the reading, it talks about each of the missions being a day's walk from each other. And if you've ever done any study of the mission, you may have known that the Spanish, the Padres that established the Spanish missions tried to make them one day's walk apart. So this is Mission San Diego right here. And then there's Mission San Luis Rey. I think that's San Luis Rey there. Mission San Juan Capistrano, missions. This is, I think Santa Ana is an asistencia. I think it's a submission because that's in Santa Ana, which is now Orange County, right? There's Mission San Gabriel, which is in San Gabriel. This is where it starts to get interesting and where we're gonna zoom in a little bit here because this is actually rather fascinating as we start to kind of drill down here. As I zoom in, we're gonna zoom in, right? Unless I can't zoom in anymore. So this is Los Angeles. There's no mission in Los Angeles. It's another asistencia. And asistencia was like a submission where it was like if you couldn't quite get to the next mission in a day, you would have kind of like a halfway point. And there's the asistencia in Los Angeles, which is going to end up being like right where Olvera Street is today, Union Station is today. That is like the center where that church is, and that church, you can still find that church today. San Fernando. There's San Fernando Mission. If you've ever been to the San Fernando Valley, Mission San Fernando, that's right there. And here's where it gets super interesting. There is Mission San Buenaventura, which is the Ventura, right? Ventura Mission. And there's Santa Barbara there. But right here, can I zoom in? Let's get back down to where we were just focused on right here. We're getting close. Okay. So this is what used to be Santa Barbara County. The counties have changed a little bit, but I want to show you this right here because this is super interesting. San Fernando Mission here. This map is not totally, like we have satellite images today that make maps more accurate, but here's what's interesting. So the Ventura Mission, San Fernando Mission here. Notice this is the Rio Santa Clara right here, the Santa Clara River. And there was actually not an asistencia, but an estancia, which is like a sub mission. And it was right, they talked about, when you read the history, they say that it's at the confluence of Castaic Creek and Rio Santa Clara, the Santa Clara River. Well, this is Castaic Creek right here. There's no more creek because it's been dammed. And instead of Castaic Creek, it's now Castaic Lake. But at the confluence here, this was one of those like sub missions where you could stop if you couldn't quite get to Santa Barbara in a day or Ventura in a day. You could stop here at the Estancia, which today is right where Castaic Junction is, because Castaic Junction is at the junction, the confluence of Castaic Creek and Rio Santa Clara. And then something else I will show you. So this is the Santa Clara River. There's Ventura right there. Again, not quite. We know that the Santa Clara River goes a little bit more east and west than it appears here on the map, but this is what's interesting. So the Rio Santa Clara has two forks as it's coming from the mountains, right? So this is Rio Sur. This is the south fork of the Santa Clara River. And so if this is Rio Sur, the south fork, then this right here would be the north fork, otherwise known as Rio Norte, the north fork of the Santa Clara River. This is San Francisco Canyon right here. It's a dry riverbed now, but back in the day it used to like contain water. Rio Norte, this is right where Rio Norte Junior High School is, right there, named after the north fork of the Santa Clara River. Okay, little fun facts there, and kind of the way that we in Santa Clarita, and specifically in at Rio Norte, we kind of tie into the story of California history. So the missions, the other thing that I wanted to point out about the missions was the role of Native Americans. Of course, the missions were designed, I think, both purposes. First of all, as a place of encounter, centers for commerce and cultural exchange, but also to convert, because again, the whole purpose of a mission is to go and try to find more people for your religion, right? In this case, for Christianity, the Spanish believed that they could make the Native Americans more civilized if they turned them into Christians, and if they brought them, invited them into the missions. The problem was they invited them in, but then didn't let them leave. So they were, in a very large sense, they were forced labor. They were very cheap labor, and some might even call them enslaved labor for the Spanish during this time in the 1700s. Okay, and I think that's all I wanted to mention, kind of the different features of missions here, which you can read. And so I think this now brings us to our final part of this, which is the Mormon Trail. So this is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So in today's parlance, they often refer to themselves as LDS, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So they have, this is like the first truly American religion, right? Like founded right here, started out in New York. Joseph Smith is the founder. He according to LDS belief, they believe that he discovered a book that an angel named Moroni gave him a series of visions, told him about this book on golden plates, and then the translation of the writings of these golden plates becomes the Book of Mormon, right? The Book of Mormon, and then that's where the name, the Mormon Church, which is kind of a nickname, and then Mormons, the followers. That's kind of where that comes from. They eventually, the movement kind of moves across from, and I'll show you on the map here. Starts out again, Joseph Smith started out in New York. Eventually, I think works his way to Ohio, and then kind of moves along, and finally ends up in Illinois. And then that's where kind of the trouble begins, because there are other Christians who again are probably not behaving in a very Christian-like manner, who say, you know what, we don't like your form of Christianity, and they start persecuting the Mormons, persecuting the LDS, mainly because they disapproved of the practice of polygamy. Polygamy was the taking of more than one wife. We've talked about this some in class, about, there's a section of the Bible that where God, according to Christian belief, God tells his followers to go forth and multiply, right? And so the Mormons, the LDS, they interpret that, a way to interpret that is for a man to take more than one wife, and then that way a man is able to create more children the more wives you have. But this was very much against what kind of the mainstream American culture was back then. Still today, in most states, maybe every state, you are only allowed to have one spouse at a time. I think that's the way the law is in most, if not every state. But so essentially, the Mormons, the LDS, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they were tired of being persecuted, right? They were experiencing religious persecution. So we're talking about push-pull factors. They left. Joseph Smith is murdered in 1844, and so their new leader, Brigham Young, if you've ever heard of BYU, the university, Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, named for the new leader of the church, Brigham Young, he says, you know what, we gotta ship out of here. We have to leave Nauvoo, Illinois, and so this map calls it the Mormon Trek. It is also the Mormon Trail. So they head out from Nauvoo, Illinois, and then end up kind of following a parallel path here along the Oregon Trail, right? Those pioneers that are along the Oregon Trail end up going through South Pass through the Rocky Mountains, and then they will end up in the Valley of the Great Salt Lake. Now, the conversation that we've had is, why wouldn't you, like the other California Trail, or folks traveling to Oregon, like why wouldn't you go to a more favorable, or you don't see like the Texas, there's no like Texas Trail, right? But why wouldn't you go to more favorable land with better farmland and trees? And why wouldn't you go to Texas, or why wouldn't you go to California or to Oregon? And so we talk about those push-pull factors for the Mormons, and one of those, well, the push factor was they were experiencing violence and persecution, so they leave Illinois. The pull factor, why would you choose a desert region as your promised land? Why not go to some place that has better farmland that's a little bit more, lush and green and has rivers and stuff? And they, I think it's for a couple of reasons, which we've talked about in class. Number one, the land is cheap, if not free, right? Like at times during the 1800s, the United States is like literally giving away land. But the other reason is, and they said, they say it's because we want a place far away where we can practice our religion without interference or judgment of others. So sometimes you move out to maybe less desirable locations because nobody else is going to be around you. You're not going to have any neighbors. So similar to the way, and I've talked about this in some of my classes, I have cousins who moved out to East Palmdale, out, 135th Street East. They're way out there in the middle of the desert. Part of the reason why they do that, part of it is because of cheap land, right? It's the real estate is much less expensive there than it is in Santa Clarita, but also just because they wanted to kind of live on a big piece of land and not have to deal with neighbors, right? So part of the reason why you might move to Acton or Agua Dulce or, East Palmdale or Victorville or, even Victorville is getting populated, kind of the outskirts, or Little Rock, is because you just want to be away from everybody else. So I think when we're talking about push-pull factors, and that's one of those things right here, the push and pull factors. I think the push was religious persecution for the Mormons. I think the pull to the Valley of the Great Salt Lake was wide open spaces, no neighbors, no persecution, no interference, just like get away from everybody. Okay, I have spoken for long enough. I've been speaking for just about 23 minutes, so my time is now up. I hope that helped you out with Mormons, missions, gold rush, and women, and look forward to seeing you in our next class. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.